So I'm Hermann. I'm the principal and creative director at 2N. This is Aucher and Serr, one of our creative technologists at 2N. And so before COVID hit, I think the most mainstream data visualization was probably the weather map, right? So everybody knows how to read a weather map. Doppler radar data is quite complex, but people know how to interpret it. We know that kind of iconography around it. So this is something everybody, including our parents and grandparents, know how to interpret. When COVID started, I realized there was a shift now, right? So even my mom would start talking about flattening the curve, and people would start to really embrace these new visuals that happened as part of the pandemic. And I thought, as a designer, this was a really interesting moment for us, where we are now really able to kind of reach a new audience and teach them how to read a choropleth map or trend lines in a meaningful way. So in the meantime, all of our clients put all of our projects on hold. And as a studio, we realized, okay, we have to kind of now fill that time gap, right? And so we collectively decided we would give back some of our expertise to the community. And we did stuff like we worked with We Think Food, which was a non-for-profit in New York City that was trying to reconnect food kitchens with people that needed food. So food insecurity all of a sudden became like this new word that I hadn't heard before. And we just tried to give back. And at the same time, we also felt like there was some kind of responsibility for us as a studio and as practitioners to give back. And this is really the origin story of the project that Aucher was leading, and I let her talk about it. But we really instinctively wanted to do something that helped to kind of explain what was going on around us as we were experiencing the pandemic, And so, with further ado, Aucher.
Thanks, Hermann. It's really nice to be here in person, and especially to be looking at this project, because, as Hermann mentioned, this was a project that we worked on in the early days of the pandemic, when things were very different and very scary. And so it's kind of nice to be standing in an in-person room and to be sharing it in retrospect. Like, some of us are still masked and we're not out of it, but it's still kind of a nice position to be in. This is a kind of informal talk. It's more about our process and our explorations getting there. But even before the pandemic, before any of this, I just had this fascination with effective public transportation. And I say effective public transportation because I grew up in Los Angeles, and anyone who's been there knows that there isn't much effective public transportation there. So moving to New York and getting there was kind of a revelation of like, wow, this system is amazing. It's shuttling so many people around the city, just the capacity of the system. And New Yorkers love to complain about how dirty it is and how late it is, but I still think it's kind of a wonder of the modern world that it like functions and gets people around. And so for a long time, I just, these were our daily commutes, like getting on the subway. And I want to share this quote from an article written in 2018 in the New York Times Magazine. And the quote is, "Most countries treat subway systems as national assets. They understand that their cities are the great wealth creators and equality enablers, and that cities don't work without subways." And I want to call out this kind of equality enablers portion. It's, our commute into our studio every day. We were sitting with lawyers and housekeepers and teachers, and there's this kind of creative density in New York that I think can only exist because of the subway. It just like can't happen otherwise. So then, April 2020 happened, and suddenly we're home. I'm like competing for the one comfy chair we have in our tiny New York apartment with my cat and my partner, and this is our office now, and we're trying to understand what's happening. We have kind of a privilege, but also a weird situation where we can shelter at home and stay, in lockdown and protected from this kind of novel virus that no one knows what's happening. And this project was kind of an attempt to like peer outside, almost like voyeuristically, like what's going on out there? Like what's happening with the city? Like, what are things still moving? Are people still traveling? So we started with something very simple. We started just looking at the MTA turnstile data. And so here, all it's showing is daily entries and exits. So when people swipe in and out of the subway, it's showing the kind of weekly churn in and out of people going on the subway. And then you see kind of the predictable, but still, I think, interesting sudden decline as the kind of New York lockdown started. So we started looking around with this. We tried out different stations. We looked at kind of the stations that were close to us and far from us. And there were similarities and some differences. And we wanted to kind of better understand how to make sense of this and how to make sense of what was happening to the city. So these are some other explorations. We had like kind of really rich, kind of creatively dynamic team. We kept kind of playing with the data in different ways. We tried kind of encoding color. We tried some kind of more abstracted representations. This was kind of another one I'll just kind of breeze through of, I was kind of always interested in the subway as kind of like the pulse of the city, you know, kind of like the bloodline. I don't think it's a very effective visualization, but it was like an interesting exploration. But at some point we got to this, you know, we were deep in the MTA turnstile data and we're like, okay, but what does it actually mean? Like, what's the point of these changes? And from there, we shifted gears a bit to the American Community Survey. And I don't know if anyone doesn't know about it, it's part of the US Census. And it's kind of a really rich data set of demographic and population and housing information about different kind of geographic regions of our country. And so we pulled census data, you know, demographic data, for the kind of regions that we most interpreted as our neighborhoods, you know, the kind of the building blocks of like what we felt were the distinct neighborhoods in our city. And so kind of the first step in putting the pieces together was we had these time series and we could look at them across stations, but what was really helpful to us was kind of to reduce that into a single metric that we could track across stations over time. So the main story that we're walking through is this one metric that we work through, which was essentially, we're calling the percent of like how many people are still riding, essentially. So we took January to April to the beginning of lockdown as kind of the baseline. And then we took an average from during the first kind of wave of the pandemic while New York was in lockdown. And we compared those to see like how many people who were active before were still riding the subway at that point. So this was kind of our main you know, metric that we pulled through. And this was roughly the distribution. So you can see each dot here in this B swarm is a single station. And you can see it both in color and in x-axis aligned with like how active that station was after the pandemic or after the lockdown started. And we saw these on a map and there are some very kind of clear patterns here. And we took that and we kind of mapped that back to the census and demographic data that we have. So we essentially took all the stations that sat within a certain geographic area and we mapped those properties back to the stations, and then we were able to ask some interesting questions about who is able to stay at home, who is able to shelter in place. And, you know, our results were not surprising, but they also surprised us by how kind of visible and clear they were. Mostly that the communities, like the more vulnerable communities that often it seems from the demographics were the frontline workers and the people putting themselves most at risk were the ones less able to shelter in place and less able to stay home. And so I'll let you explore the project later. This is kind of part of it, and then you can explore it, the stations close to your heart in your own time. But this was our project and we're really happy to share it with you all.